Right. Now, I am going to introduce our first set of uh, keynote presentations, which is it's going to be done as a pair, and then I'm also going to hand over to Vice President of IAFOR, Donald Hall, who's then going to sort of take the reins as an MC. But first of all, I'd like to introduce Professor Hall here, and this is on page 34 and 35 of your programs for presentation on the work of the university in perilous times. Donald Hall is Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at Binghamton University in SUNY, the State University of New York, in the United States, and has formerly served as an administrator at the Universities of Rochester and Lehigh, as well as other various institutions. He has an international reputation in literature, queer studies, cultural studies, and has served notably as on a number of international associations and national associations, including on the Executive Council of the MLA. He's been a long-time friend, colleague, and collaborator of both me personally and of IAFOR, and has helped structure us, build us from both the inside and outside. And his presentation today, and this group of presentations, I think is a very interesting, timely, and courageous set. So I'd like to welcome onto the stage Professor Donald Hall.
Thank you very much, and I will keep checking my time to make sure I don't get a red card. Um, and I do want to extend my welcome to this wonderful organization also. And Joe, I was trying to remember, I think this is about my 20th IAFOR conference, something like that, which is extended over, a dozen years. So obviously I keep coming back because it's wonderful. I'm gonna, sort of shift into I don't want to say sort of a darker conversation, but certainly, one that I think is very sobering, and that's about the state of higher education internationally. But I want to focus specifically in my time on what's happening in the United States right now. Um, we feel as an administrator, certainly, but also as teachers, in many ways as students and as staff members, that we're under attack. And that may be shared by many of you, depending on where you come from. Certainly, the concept of intellectual freedom, which has been a hallmark of American higher education, is particularly threatened right now. What we do at universities is often caricatured or lampooned by politicians, and in the media, we're seen as eggheads, we're seen as divorced from reality. What we do is frivolous, impractical, and in some ways a threat in many regards. Of course, not all of us who work in higher education across the whole landscape are treated that way. No one right now in the US regularly attacks people who are teaching in business fields or teaching in engineering fields. But for those of us, as all of us in this room are, who are teaching in humanities, in the arts, in cultural studies, in languages, in the social sciences, we are being seen as superfluous and in many ways a threat to culture. Um, and I want to say I bring a particularly personal kind of perspective to this. I grew up in the rural South in the United States. Very, very small town in Alabama. No one in my family went to college. No one in my peer group intended to go to college. Um, and I was a gay kid and feeling very out of touch with my surroundings. And I wasn't even sure, to be very honest with you, that I saw a livable life for myself. I won't say I was actively suicidal, but I certainly could not imagine a future for myself until I got to the university. I had taken a year of language study in high school. And then when I got to the university, my local public university, I found among my small peer group in what happened to be a German department, I had studied German in high school, a group of kids who were misfits like myself, who were interested in books, who were interested in culture, who were interested in literature and the arts and thinking about the world, not just what was happening on campus. And that allowed me to begin imagining a life for myself outside the confines of what I grew up in. And that, I will say, in some ways may have, if not saved my life, at least gave me the life that I have today. It was, one that led me into finally a PhD and to living in many different countries around the world and to teaching around the world and to wonderful conferences like this and associations with people from, across the globe. Um, so language studies, the humanities, the arts gave me a livable life because it showed the life that I had experienced to that point in time wasn't the only life possible. And I think that's something that, takes us to that very sort of point of what is the purpose of higher education. Why do conferences like this matter so much in times like the ones we're living in today? And what can we do, or what is it imperative that we in higher education do to challenge that climate, that political climate that we find ourselves in today? And again, I'm speaking very specifically about the universities in the US. So, what is the purpose of higher education? Is it to train students mechanically for specific vocational tracks? I mean, any one of us, we're all smart people. We could have gone to a 2-year program and learned how to repair cars or build houses or become an electrician or become perhaps an accountant, accounting clerk. And I'm not denigrating any of those things, but that's very different from what we do at universities. Or is it, in fact, is it the purpose of a university to take students on a journey of broadening their consciousness, of deepening their understanding of the complexities of the world around them, and of growing their potential for being able to intervene in some of the most pressing crises that we're confronted with globally, and to do so with creativity, with an ability to see the world from a variety of different viewpoints, and with an awareness of the needs of others unlike themselves. And that, I say, is the work of universities that we have to defend today. And certainly it's the work of an organization like IAFOR, which is, again, what has kept me kept me coming back all these many years. And it's that word diverse others and diversity of viewpoints, I think, that has become such a flashpoint in the United States right now, that word diversity. I mean, it's what many of us do, what we depend upon in the work that we do. It's what we it's sort of what we depend upon if we're doing cultural studies or language studies or arts or humanities or whatever, that exploring the diversity of perspective, thought, and culture. In several of the books I've written, and certainly many of the talks I've given at IAFOR, I've tried to think about that concept of diversity from a particular point of view as critical. And what I do is often return to the work of a philosopher, a German philosopher named Hans Georg Gadamer. Gadamer was a 20th century philosopher. He lived from 1900 to 2001, so he spanned the entire 20th century. And in his big work, which is called Truth and Method, or Wahrheit und Methode in German, he examines how we actually learn through encounters with difference, that confrontation of perspectives, of points of view, of worldviews. It's how change occurs and how we grow as human beings. So we can't learn anything new if we're only surrounded by those who think exactly like us. That we have to encounter diverse others in order to even begin to understand the limitations of our own perspectives and what we have sort of viewed, how we viewed the world in the past. That's the only way we learn about our own mistakes, our own limitations, and we learn anything about ourselves and how our selfhoods are bounded by our cultures and our past. So this is well, again, central to what's happening, on some of our campuses back in the US when politicians would like to shut down diversity offices, ban discussions of difference and silence dissent, because what they're doing is they're opposing the very process of learning itself. They're actually what they're proponents of and what they're trying to protect is stasis, sameness, being caught or being sort of kept at the same point in time or actual reversion to the past. And this isn't what you would call conservatism because conservatism is actually about incremental change over time. This is actually closer to, something like, reactionary reversion of past belief systems, sexism, racism, homophobia, et cetera. And all of that reversion, I would say, actually kills the process of learning and knowledge creation. And this has everything to do with what is now, again, a growing movement in the US around shutting down language departments, shutting down humanities departments, and shutting down arts departments. I mentioned it in the little overview that was published in the program that I had a particular encounter with this at one of the places that I taught, and that was West Virginia University. West Virginia is a very poor part of the United States. I was the chair of the languages department there for a while. I was also then chair of the English department. And in the past 2 or 3 years, what's happened there is tragic because the administration of the university first changed the requirement around whether students should change or should study foreign languages. They decided that languages were not important, that only English was important. Then they overbuilt in terms of investment in certain facilities. They spent wildly, and then they found themselves in a budget deficit. And then they pointed to the languages department, and which they had changed the rules around students taking courses. The enrollments had dropped. They said, "Look, you're not of use anymore," and then they shut them all down. And so it's actually not about whether or not there is something intrinsically useful, or whether even students, should study language. It's actually the fact that they did not want that perspective of learning anything about the outside the boundaries of the United States. They found that threatening, and they found an easy scapegoat in a languages curriculum. Because in reading other languages, studying cultures unlike ourselves, we have to confront our own ignorance. We have to open ourselves up to worldviews that are not like our own worldviews and that perhaps challenge what we think we know. I mean, for any of us, when we read a novel, when we read a poem, or when we immerse ourselves in a film, we give up the sanctity of our own worldview and throw ourselves into the worldview of another, an artist. Um, and let that uncertainty of what's going to happen, how am I seeing the world now, fill me. And that uncertainty, I would say, is very generative. It's why art is so threatening to would be autocrats and would be fascists, because it decenters the self, it brings in that uncertainty, it challenges, the very concept of one truth of political fundamentalism. It makes me think, of course, of, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, that scary novel about banning books. And, because books are seen as so threatening because they don't tell what people would consider a truth. They fill you with a question mark about what is true. And so, we see this playing out again in the United States right now with a lot of books being banned and libraries being told what they can and cannot have on their shelves. But in many ways, it also links the anti sort of humanities agenda with what is also, actually relatively common in the US, and that is an anti science agenda. because climate change, other issues that, the beginning, questions about the beginnings and the realities of coronavirus, which we just came through, and whether vaccines work or not, all of that is sort of linked to, a kind of questioning of anything that challenges the sense that we have of our own mastery over the world, over science, over technology, and ultimately over ourselves. But this is where I think we actually have a path forward of some form of hope because as provost now, which at a big university, I've got 900, almost 1,000 faculty reporting to me. I have colleges of engineering and arts and sciences and business and pharmacy and nursing, et cetera, all reporting up to me. I find a lot of sympathy from those individuals who are actually working in the sciences and working in the business for those who are trying to defend the liberal arts and defend the humanities and defend the social sciences and defend those of us working in language studies because they understand also, especially scientists and engineers, that you have to test reality. You have to test what you think is true in order for there to be any advance of knowledge. And I would say that we have to, on our campuses, build those bridges, between those of us working in the fields that are represented at this conference and those who are working in very different fields that may be more science bound or tech bound. We have to remind all of those who will listen to us that a diversity of thinking, approach, and background is an essential good, that it is necessary for all learning and discovery, that diverse businesses are more successful than non-diverse businesses, that diverse laboratories in the sciences are more inventive than homogenous ones, that the ability or at least to speak or at least appreciate a foreign language allows one to cross boundaries in ways that are profitable economically as well as enriching personally. And I will say that it's lovely that we have phones now where where you can say into the phone, "Where is the subway?" and it will translate it into Japanese or whatever, and that will get you some help that you may need. But that is in and of itself is not going to allow you to understand Japan. It's not going to allow you to understand another culture's perspective just because one can mechanically do something that is useful at the moment through using a translation app. It also means, I think, for those of us in arts, humanities, and social sciences, that we have to understand where our students' needs are and where their parents' anxieties are. And that oftentimes revolves around where they can get a job. And I think we can say that what we do does equip students for vocational success. It's a myth that studying language, studying literature, studying art, studying writing, studying history, studying, any of the social sciences represented here is not practical because it is incredibly practical. It allows students to acquire skills that are useful in the workforce. And I don't think we should deny that fact. I think we should embrace that fact that it's that actually by learning how to speak, how to communicate, and how to see and appreciate difference is in fact a vocational skill that will allow students to get jobs, keep jobs, adapt to new um, employment opportunities, and that will actually lead to success in life rather than stasis. I think, for us, the tragedy in the US is we're running away from some of this when actually it's what made arguably the US higher education system so successful for so long. And we're becoming more narrow rather than more embracing of the very things that actually, uh, contributed to the success of American higher education. But I would say for those of us, certainly like myself, where I hold a tenured position, I have an administrative position. I'm at an American university that has a strong track record of training students. We have a particular responsibility for defending this, which is why I've been speaking about topics like this regularly now in newspaper articles as well as, in venues across the country and across the globe, that, we have it is imperative that each of us, and I will say for myself, as an administrator, that we do this work and we carry this message, because who would oppose us would, will in fact, I think, succeed at shutting down a lot of what makes education so important for so many kids like myself, but also like the ones who are today struggling to find a place for themselves in the world. It's not a call to martyrdom, however. I mean, I'm not saying that we have to risk anything in terms of losing our jobs. I go back to a concept that Michel Foucault, the great French philosopher, also advanced, called specific intellectualism, in which we use the position that we find ourselves in, whether I'm sitting in a provost's office or you're sitting in a classroom, or you're sitting as a department chair, or you're as a student or as a researcher, to figure out the tactics that you can use around yourself, to make sure that this appreciation of what we do is recognized, and we use the language that is available to us to convince others to that about the inherent worth of what we're doing. And that is something, again, that Foucault always exemplified, and I think we have to continue to live that. um but it's not all pessimism. I think, again, I think that there are ways that we can find allies, as I said before. I think, finally, if we, keep going back to the fact that what we do is important for economic vitality, for success in terms of science, in terms of business, in terms of, the progress of our very societies and cultures, that we can actually convince others. um, I think that we have to understand, again, where our students are coming from and what the fears that they have, but address those fears and calm those fears, because what we're trying to give them is the ability to thrive in life, but also in their vocations. And I think we have to be very aware of the tactics that are being used by politicians and by others who would, again, take us backwards rather than take us forwards. One of the things that early in my life, I was a political activist as well as a graduate student back during the late 1980s. There was an organization in the United States, a gay rights organization called ACT UP, that I was involved in. And their famous slogan was silence equals death. That if you're silent, then you're not alive. And it's very possible that your very life itself will be threatened. So if we remember that, we cannot stay silent. We have to be self protective. But if we do speak up and learn how to exercise our power, I do think that we have a better future ahead of us than what our politicians would have us. So thank you very much. And again, welcome to IAFOR.